Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Miguel Mendez, Marketing Specialist here at Unravel Data. And before we get started, there are three housekeeping reminders that I would like to cover. The first is, throughout the webinar, please drop your questions into the question box, and we'll do our best to answer them live or respond via email if we're short on time. If you submit one of the top 10 questions during this event as ranked by one of our fantastic panelists, you'll earn some cool Unravel swag. Additionally, this webinar will be available instantly on demand to listen to at your leisure, so feel free to pause or replay as needed. And lastly, help us improve. Share your feedback on the session by rating this webinar, and let us know if there are any other topics you'd like to hear about. All right, that covers it. So with the reminders out of the way, the floor is all yours.
Customers may be trying to do this today. So let's dive in. All righty. So what you're seeing here on this first slide, I only got a couple slides, but what we're seeing right now is a popular FinOps platform tool. It's from IBM Apptio, and it is called Cloudability. Some of you might be familiar with it and maybe even using it now. So organizations, they love tools like this because, well, first of all, they've been around for a long time. They've been in the market for a while. And we at Unravel like to refer to these tools as general FinOps tools. So these platforms, these tools, they will connect to the cloud providers themselves. They'll take in data, so that way they can create easy dashboards, the one you're seeing here, and then they can report on things such as infrastructure services. What are those costs, right? They can start understanding trends and usages around that, those patterns, and even start to do some forecasting. So beyond that, if organizations are using things like infrastructure tagging, which mostly they can then use those tags to start doing some individual grouping in terms of understanding by a specific tag, which may be linked to a cost center or a department or a user. Now this works wonderfully for infrastructure as a service, for PaaS, right? Observability through that FinOps lens. But what about SaaS and those platforms? So now when organizations want to connect this, for example, to a SaaS platform like Snowflake, that underlying infrastructure it's now abstracted away from the Snowflake user, right? That's by design. As a Snowflake user, you don't know what it's leveraging on the back end. And that's actually part of the allure and the beauty of Snowflake, right? But a lot of the feedback that we get is that Snowflake is really seen as it's a black box, right? Because what Snowflake will show in, for example, Cloudability is all it does is it just connects to maybe the billing API, and it's only at that service level, that observability, right? So kind of akin to what's shown in the actual billing and usage dashboard, like what I'm showing here, right? Sure, I can see I spent X on storage or Y in credits, but what if we want to actually get deeper? And that's common for FinOps teams to want to understand and do, right? They want to investigate things like, hey, I've been getting these monthly Snowflake bills. They're in the thousands or tens of thousands of dollars and trending upwards. Okay, now out of that Snowflake bill, how much of that was connected to a specific department's user group? And maybe just as importantly, even getting down to the nitty-gritty cost per user, cost per query. And then aggregating up, that's what you want to do. It's easier than that top-down approach, right? Top-down being, hey, here's my total warehouse spend over a period of time. I think maybe this group or that group of users had access to it. I got to go investigate that sort of thing. Now what? It's process. So it's common for FinOps teams to want to understand how cost is attributed to a finer grained user level or even an app level, right? A query level. Now, on the Snowflake side, there are other native out-of-the-box tools, such as the account usage and information schema views, what I'm showing here. Sometimes these are referred to as system tables. Now, these tables do a great job of providing some informational benefits, right? Specifically, some good cost visibility at that warehouse level. But again, tying this back to that fine-grained granular cost per app, cost per query level, it's a challenge, right? And if you've been following the series so far, the webinar series, we touched on this last week and the best practice of leveraging maybe Snowflake object tagging. But again, it was at that warehouse level perspective, right? So related to that finer grained, that deeper level app query level, yes, you too can use some tags at that query context level, right? But that's a challenge also. It requires some manual effort and actual combining some data sets together to be able to get this information. Usually requires an SME to understand it and then dashboard it out in an effective manner. So, but beyond that, how do we operationalize this? How do we get alerted in real time? So for example, there's a query that ran longer than this many minutes, or costs more than this many dollars, or just failed in the last week. How many times did it fail? Maybe there's a query that's been running for a while and starting to incur costs. We want to be alerted to that when it goes beyond a threshold. Well, these system tables, they're not really going to have that because this effort isn't in real time, right? And if you're looking for some of those real-time use cases, or if you're looking at it from that perspective, and you want to perform some action or set up some governance or guardrails around it, well, you're just not going to get that by leveraging these tools alone today. But other than that, those small caveats, right? These are still very useful tools. They're important tools, the tables and dashboards from Snowflake. And we actually encourage our customers to use them if they're not doing that already in parallel with Unravel. So in a nutshell, folks are definitely following the FinOps principles. They're using the general FinOps platform tools like the cloudability I showed earlier, the Snowflake system tables here, and the billing and usage tables as well, because it's all part of the platform. But what I'd actually like to do next is move into the demo. And I'd like to show you how getting the cost per app or cost per query in the Snowflake context is actually very easy to get from an Unravel perspective. And then from there, we're going to actually talk about some of the impact. How do we actually measure the impact if we were to proactively give some recommendations and then actually reduce resource consumption without affecting performance and stability? All right. And so with that, what you're seeing now is our Snowflake DataOps and FinOps observability, or really more accurately named actionability platform. And I'm going to start here in this cost tab and this user subtab. And what you're seeing here is a drill down report into the usage over the past 10 days. So February 12th through the 22nd. Of this particular account, right? So you can be connected to multiple Snowflake accounts. I can actually observe details across those accounts and filter by which I'd like to zoom in on. So from there, I'm looking at the chargeback from that user perspective in this dashboard. And by the way, all we need to do really is just a simple configuration. It takes just a few minutes to connect to your Snowflake environment. And then now this dashboard, this report, right, all this data starts flowing in. The best part about this is it comes in real time. It takes us about a minute or less to process the information, but we don't have to wait hours or days for some kind of batch process to come in. We simply start tracking costs at this user level. So right out of the gate here, we're at a more granular level than what we were seeing from a system table perspective, right, without some manual effort. We can see total number of users, sure, average query cost per user, some trending around that. We can see our top users by query cost and those estimated chargebacks by those users, right, those percentages. And we can see clearly here, both visually and in our top user list, right, our top offenders list, that users Renew and Viswa are consuming the bulk of our Snowflake query spend in this period, right? So not even a full month. Don't forget that part. Just 10-day kind of period here that we selected, but around 38% each. So now we're starting to identify at an average query cost per user, and then we're aggregating for those last 10 days, again, grouping by user to really understand where the spend is going. So this is why that cost per app or per query in the Snowflake contest is very important, because if we can get very, very granular, it's a lot easier for us to say, hey, who does this user roll up to? Maybe which cost center or cost centers, which project or projects, departments. Once we have all this information and it's coming in at a real-time pace, now this starts to get really, really interesting from that FinOps lens perspective. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to understand what are the queries that this, what's this user doing? What are the queries that he's running? And I'll just select one of these top users here in a moment, because what it's telling me is that I might need to go have a conversation with this user. But before I go do that, I have to do some investigating, right? I need a little bit more granular detail because at this user level, it's aggregated up slightly, right? A bit higher than where I want to go dive into to get more details at that query level. And so the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to navigate to, let me pick this user. Okay, so what this actually did was it conveniently took me from, we were just at the cost tab here, we were at the cost tab, and it brought me over to the query tab. And so I'm going to do a few other things. I'm going to make a couple other selections. I want to select or show inefficient queries only. Again, we're sorting by Viswa, that user, right? I'm going to sort by cost in a descending fashion from highest to lowest. And so now what are we seeing is, but all of this user Viswa's queries in this time frame sorted by cost. I also get a ton of other information, right? I get the status of the query, failed, did it succeed? If I scroll out here to the right, I get, start and end time of those operations, the duration of those queries, right? I'm understanding the which warehouse did it run on, the query ID itself, and even some of the SQL context, right, is shown here. So now I'm starting to get a picture of cost per app, cost per query for this particular user, from that standpoint, without waiting for a period of time, hours sometimes, or having to retroactively see where spend went. It's real time. It's something that just works out of the box from that Unravel perspective. Now, everything I've been talking about so far is what 80% of our customers do when they're going down their FinOps journey. And that's really just to identify where is the spend going, who is it actually attributed to, and maybe having that conversation next. But I'd say a good 20-25% of organizations maybe are already there somewhat. And if they're utilizing Unravel, it's been accelerated for them. But the next logical question is, okay, now how do I make this better? How do I improve it? How do I improve my spend? But at the same time, I can't affect performance or stability, right? Because a failed query, a failed app or query, right? Those are no good either. That's not a good thing. So for my next part of this demo here, I'm going to actually drill into one of these queries. And let's dive into this guy. Okay, so again, a lot of information here at the top. That estimated query cost in both the dollars and cents and equivalent Snowflake credits, right? Some more details around the state of the query, start and end times, some IO information in terms of scan bytes and written bytes, how many rows was affected in those IO operations. By the way, that factors into the cost, right? Scanning in and out from perhaps a database table somewhere. Total duration of this query in minutes and seconds down here. Some other warehouse information, right? Hey, this is a 4x large. standard warehouse. Again, this also factors into cost, right? That t-shirt size that we selected to run our query. So, but I want to bring your attention down to the lower left here to this Insights tab. Now think about this section down here as your expert in a box. Now, let me expand and explain a little bit. We know how challenging it can be from that efficiency standpoint and best practices standpoint on how best to write your code, right? I've worked with quite a few developers over the years. It can be very time consuming to troubleshoot, slow or failed queries or otherwise, rewrite them from a performance and efficiency standpoint. So in that case, notice this red efficiency kind of bubble here, right? So what you're seeing here are recommendations there's two of them here, to drive cost efficiency for this particular query. And so taking this first one, avoid cross joins, right? Well, let me stop for a second. We know that in the Snowflake world, right, not only do the warehouse sizes, things like min, max, cluster nodes, auto suspend delays, those things make a difference, right? And we want to account for those, and we do in another part of the platform here. But we also know that efficiencies at that code level, the SQL level, right, are also just as important. And so at Unravel, we're not just going to give general recommendations. We know the inner workings because we've been working on a modern data stacks and their use cases for the past 10 plus years. So just wanted to make that sort of footnote comment here before we dig in. But here's where we're recommending to avoid a cross join, right? We all know, hopefully we all know, right? What a cross join is, right? It's also known as a Cartesian product. It's when we return all the rows in a query. So again, those rows affected at the top there, right? Hey, so each row in table A is paired with each row in table B. This results in that explosion of data. And so what we're having a specific recommendation to consider using an inner join instead. There might be a business reason for using a cross join, but it's a conversation starter. It's a place to start. And by the way, we're flagging these across your entire estate, right? So potentially across thousands of queries. All right, so with that knowledge, with that backing here, we're able to create, the purpose-built AI, right, to provide these recommendations, these specific recommendations like that inner join. So that way, if we're trying to solve for maybe improving efficiency or performance and, consequently cost, well, hey, there's nothing else to do here. We've done the analysis for you, right? The expert in the box. We looked at the historical scenarios. You can actually be confident that by applying these recommendations, we're going to save you dollars and cents and credits, right? And that if you put in practice these recommendations, you'll shorten, for example, that IO cost or total duration in terms of time on that 4x large warehouse. But rest assured, we're also not going to negatively impact performance, and we're also not going to fail the query from a stability standpoint. So let me go to another screen here real quick to illustrate the point, right? And if you've been following the webinar, let me just make a selection here. If you've been following the webinar series, I covered a bit of this screen last week, but just a quick high-level recap. This is our health check dashboard, our Fitbit, if you will, of your Snowflake environment. So it's a glimpse into the health of your environment in terms of how it's performing. It's an efficiency in terms of spend. And in this case, we're focused in on queries, right? But we look at the warehouse level, we look at that data level, and we take all that into consideration. We correlate all of that across those different areas. From this insight or efficiency, inefficient query standpoint, right, what we're looking at here and that insight analysis perspective, there's quite a bit of untapped savings you'll notice here, right? So if you were to apply these in these categories, these easy fixes, right? These recommendations like I just showed on the other screen, you would realize an annualized savings, in this case, $14,000 to $20,000, right? But when you have this, and this is proactively being done for all your queries, not only are you able to find queries at that app, and apps at that level, but you can now understand, hey, is there room to make things more efficient? We're basically doing the root cause analysis for you, or for a very technical team, right? So we can enable your FinOps teams to have that conversation to say, hey, data science team, you guys are our biggest spend, and Unravel, right? Aggregating the savings here, saying that, hey, I could save that 14 to 20K annually simply by you following these links and actually applying the recommendations. Think of how powerful that is. If you can bring the accountability back to the end users, those actual users of the platform, the ones that are actually driving up the spend and giving those folks the easy button almost, if you will. So those guys can't give you any more excuses as to why they're not going to improve their apps, right? They've got no more excuses in terms of because all the work's been done here for you. All they need to do is simply apply it. So that's identifying at the cost per app or query, then measuring is by actually looking at what the optimizations are and measuring the impact from that perspective. That part is pretty straightforward. The last thing I wanted to actually show here is how do we now actually apply this, apply some governance from that standpoint, right? There's a lot of different ways we can do this, and we're going to cover this in other demos in the series here. But for this one, I'm just going to simply set up an alert, right? And for us to do that, all we have to do is click on this alerting tab. Okay. So Unravel provides a lot of out-of-the-box alerts, or you can create your own custom alert, right? You can create your own monitor. We have a lot of different categories by which to do that, right? Per query monitor, for example, this is kind of where we're focused today. So as an example, hey, I have a simple use case, right? Maybe there's a policy I want to set up at the Snowflake query level, like I just showed, because lately there's been an influx of queries that cost $1,000 or more. So I want to know, when is this occurring? If it goes over $1,000, I want to do something. That $1,000 price tag, that's my trigger. So now let's automatically perform some action, maybe through a notification channel, a post to Slack, a simple email, some other mechanism, integrate into a ticketing system such as ServiceNow. And then this will prompt me to go look at the cost saving insight and recommendation in order to be more proactive versus reactive, bringing our budget back down into a more manageable state. So a lot better than where things are at today, where folks don't know where their spend is going. And you have FinOps teams that are trying to provide accountability, but struggle to have these very technical conversations with a very technical data stack like Snowflake, right? Why not have Unravel be the alerting mechanism, and then also provide the proactive recommendations to hopefully get cost and spend back on track. And all of this is really dependent on understanding, that granular level of data, which is measuring and tracking cost per app, per query, right? So today, what we covered is why is it important to track cost per query in a data platform like Snowflake, right? We covered how customers are doing it today. In fact, if you're actually following some FinOps principles in your organization, and maybe since you're attending this webinar today, you're probably using a lot of these platforms, right? But we wanted to show you what life would be like if we used a platform that was purpose-built for modern data stacks like Snowflake to make your life easier and ultimately save money for the organization. I'm going to go and look at the questions that came in. So I'll just read them out loud here and then give you a response. So first question here is, what are some granular costs I should be tracking in Snowflake? Okay, so it's easy to aggregate at whatever level you want, right? If we can just get to that fine grain, that lowest grain, that lower granularity, right? And in this case, like we've been talking about today, is the query level. Once we have that, it's easy for us to aggregate back up into, say, that query belongs to this user, belongs to this department, so on and so forth, right? So as far as organizations are concerned who really want to understand the cost drivers, right? The lower the granularity that you can get to, the more you can identify where that cost driver is going, and then also start having conversations on how to optimize, right? Even setting up some governance and guardrails, like the alerting we were talking about. You just have to have that visibility first. So second question, can you provide examples of how companies break down their Snowflake data silos to improve cost forecasting? So yeah, kind of like what I was saying earlier, it really starts with identifying the cost drivers in your organization. And then again, once you have that lowest granular kind of detail, again, in this case, at that query level, it's again easy for us to aggregate up. Now, the reason why this is important is because you need to identify the people who can actually affect reducing costs. And that's actually the users themselves of the technology. So like I had mentioned previously, organizations and FinOps teams specifically, those guys sometimes struggle having these conversations with very technical audiences because you've got, the technical Snowflake user who's saying, hey man, this is an important pipeline, or hey, this is, I don't know, that next gen AI project. It's got visibility up the chain. They're going to give you a bunch of excuses because they know that in order for somebody to actually tell them how to actually affect the cost, you're going to have a technical conversation. A lot of folks have been using Snowflake, at that senior level. Those folks, they've been doing this for a while now. So you'll get some pushback. But what if we took Unravel? We took the Unravel Snowflake expert in a box. Then it doesn't really matter where your teams reside. It could be the accounting team, the data science team, the AI team, whoever. Unravel can be the, quote unquote, that can be the bad guy, right? And let those folks know, hey, the way that you're running your pipeline, maybe your project, it's overtly inefficient. It's overspent by, 35% this month. And Unravel is actually telling me that we could save, 35% if you started applying the recommendations simply by just clicking on this link. Or maybe, embedding in their software development lifecycle process. I know we didn't touch on this yet, but proactively telling them, in their CI/CD or Jira or something, just as a comment, hey, here's a link, go check this out. We can save some dollars here. So in effect, really taking the FinOps team out of the equation, that's how you can break down the data silos. You first need to identify and understand how things are trending, provide the optimization, I'd say, to kind of reduce that accelerated spend, and then ultimately have this information to set up governance and guardrails like the alerts that we were showing previously. Okay, last question. How long does it typically take to see tangible results and cost management? Okay, so definitely a topic top of mind for a lot of organizations, right? Because everybody wants to be responsible for their cloud spend, but it's hard. So Yeah, and without Unravel, FinOps teams do struggle to enforce governance and accountability, especially to a technical base of users who are using those data platforms to address cost overruns, right? So whatever the reasons are, it might be, hey, this is just how it is. We're just dealing with a lot of data. Yeah, you don't understand how this technical stuff works. Yes, it's expensive. But hey, it's got executive visibility up the chain, so on and so forth. What we want to be able to do is empower the FinOps teams that are really just trying to follow the FinOps principles by embedding Unravel into the process. Do what we call is to shift left and really fixing a lot of these inefficiencies by or through Snowflake's or Unravel's Snowflake expert in a box, but ultimately providing accountability on the user of the data platform. We want them to do the right thing. That's what we do. That we do this all day, every day. We work with large data organizations, some of the largest data teams out there. And we ensure that they're doing the right thing, ensuring that we're being responsible with the spend on those data platforms, at the end of the day. And it all starts by getting down to that granular level of visibility of cost and working our way up. Thank you. And again, my name is Hal Sriver. Please feel free to reach out if you have any additional questions.